You are listening to the Model Train Talk podcast. Each episode, RJ and I discuss various topics about the world's greatest hobby, model trains. The purpose of this podcast is to help promote, inspire, and bring a breath of fresh air to the hobby. Recording the podcast makes it possible to share stories of others and to help grow the model train community. Thank you for listening to the Model Train Talk podcast. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Model Train Talk podcast. It has been a really long time, but me and RJ finally have a little bit of free time on our weekend today, and we're going to interview Bob, who is a really big, avid model train collector, and he's been involved with a lot of real life trains and stuff like that. So, Bob, welcome to the Model Train Talk podcast again. We appreciate you coming on today to talk about your experience with model trains and real life trains. So, I'm going to let you take the wheel. How did you get into model trains? How did you get into real life trains? Just kind of start your story from the beginning.
Okay. The first train I ever got, I don't remember it. Obviously, I was 2 years old, but I have pictures of it. My dad bought me a Lionel HO. It's called a 0635. It's a Southern Pacific. Came with the operating mill car, the log dump car, lighted caboose. And that was in 1961. And back then, that was a lot of accessories pushed into one train set. And I was into HO when I first got into trains for a very long time. Only because of space. We didn't really have a lot of extra space to spread out. And eventually, I got into O-gauge trains from a cousin of mine. When we always used to go visit my grandma, they lived out near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm in central Jersey. My cousin lived with her, and he had a lot of Lionel post-war. And he would have his train set up from time to time, especially around the holidays. So whenever we'd go visit, around Thanksgiving and Christmas, all his Lionel O-gauge trains would be set up going around the tree and the couch and the room and everywhere. So that kind of like lit the fire into O-gauge. And from there, I started getting basically beginner sets because at that time, I didn't know anything. And, it was way before TMCC and Legacy and everything else. It was basically all post-war. So I would get beginner sets and some post-war. And I continued with that after the HO. And then lo and behold, things started changing with the industry in general. Between Weaver and MTH and Atlas and Lionel, everything became more developed, more detailed. The product lines changed. They branched out into all different types of things. And I eventually went from, one level to another, to another, to another, to another. Besides when I was small living at home, when I got my first apartment, my first layout was 4x6, which was not much room for anything, but I didn't have the space. And then from there, I went to a 4x8. And then from there, I went to a 4x12. And then from there, I went to what I currently have, which is 8x24. And that's where I am now. It's got a lot of years and a lot of work and underwent a lot of changes. Everybody says there's no such thing as a permanent layout. I've made a lot of changes over the last couple of years here and there. You add a tree here, you take out a building here, you put something different there. So it's a work in progress. It's never finished.
So in addition to modeling, you've also had experience on the Chesapeake and Ohio number 614 when it ran excursions in the late 90s. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, especially for us younger people who may not even know about 614 because it's been sitting in Virginia for most of our lives?
Yeah, I went the very first trip they ever ran. I went strictly as a passenger. My wife and I went for the ride. It ran from Hoboken, New Jersey to Port Jervis, New York, which is not really upstate New York, but it's kind of in the corner of New Jersey and New York. It's upstate a little bit, and we went strictly as rail fans. And I had an incredible time. I mean, just it was the first time I was actually behind a really big mainline steam engine going at track speed. I've been to all of the local tourist railroads in the area. I've been to Strasburg. I've been to New Hope. There's another one, Black River and Western in Flemington, New Jersey. I went to the one in Essex, Connecticut, but to be behind a big Northern going at 79 miles an hour was an experience, to say the least. And I got to talk to some of the guys that were actually on the engine crew, and just general questions, hey, how'd you get involved? Where are you guys based out of? How is it? What do you do on the train? Just general questions. And although there were licensed and paid employees that did a lot of the really technical stuff that you need to be licensed for to run a mainline steam engine, there were also a lot of volunteers from a school in North Jersey, Bergen County Tech. And I would say probably 70% of the crew was strictly volunteer. So I just kind of put myself out there. I said, well, how do you volunteer? What do you do? So they gave me a number for Ross Rowland, who at the time was housing the engine in Lebanon, New Jersey. And I wrote him a letter, and I had told him about my interest in trains, and I was a passenger on the train, and I would really like to be involved, in doing more. I'd like to join the crew. If there would be anything that I can do. So being the type of work I do, I don't have access to a phone all day long. So I gave him my phone number from my mom's house because she was home all day. And if he did call, she would be there to take the call. So I got a message to call Ross. And at that time, I had no idea who she was talking about because I didn't know her Ross. And it was actually Ross Rowland. So I about flipped. So I called him up right away. And it was, in fact, Ross Rowland. We talked for a couple minutes. And he said, I'd like to meet you. Come on up and would love to have you join the crew. And I went up. I met with Ross Rowland, who I have the ultimate respect for. On a personal note, the man did everything possible for me and my family. He never charged me a nickel for any of the tickets that my family, my wife, my kids, I had friends, my boss. He did anything I could possibly ask. And he was just a very, very, very professional, yet a very nice gentleman to work with and work for. The first year I worked on 614, I was basically, just a wheel polisher, cleaning this, cleaning that, because I was a beginner. I didn't know anything. And, as both you guys know, with real railroads, depending on what you're doing, you have to be licensed. You have to know what you're doing, because you're playing with the big toys. You could get seriously hurt if you don't do what you're supposed to or be where you're supposed to be. You can get really hurt. So I was just kind of like kind of like a gopher, which was okay because it was more involved than I was before. And at the end of the year, I had asked Mr. Rowland if I could sit down and talk to him for a couple minutes. And I don't know, I think maybe he thought I was looking to bail out and drop out, but I was not. I had told him, I had thanked him, first of all, for the opportunity. And from there, I told him that I wanted to learn more. I wanted to do more. I wanted to go further. What do I have to do for you in order to get more involved and go further? And he had sent me down to New Hope and Ivyland for 2 summers to learn how to fire a steam locomotive. and I was down in New Hope, Pennsylvania, working on number 40, which still runs today, learning how to fire a steam locomotive. And I got more involved with 614 through that way because Ross was part of a group with a gentleman named Paul Nakini who ran New Hope. So between the two of them, they arranged for me to go down there. And I learned an awful lot about railroading. I learned an awful lot about running a steam locomotive. I got to run a steam locomotive. So, anybody that's a train fan, I mean, that's like the ultimate.
Yeah.
So we after I had done that, I got to be more involved with 614. We ran 6 trips in the spring. We ran 6 trips in the fall, and it made for a long day. It was a fun day, and it was a lot of work, but it was work that you really enjoyed, and you got to pull something away from it other than just going and doing the work. You got something out of it, and it was it was a lot of fun. I spent almost 8 years doing it, and I'd like to do it again someday if anything ever happens, but the likelihood of that may not work, but who knows? Someday something might happen, and they put her back on the road, I'm in.
Right. That sounds very exciting. You said that you had, more than just running trains, you actually learned something from that experience. So what was like one of the biggest things that you pulled away from that entire 8-year experience running that 614?
How to change I'm trying to think of the technical part. One trip we had the misfortune of there inside the pistons and the cylinder, there is a metal ring, kind of like a metal gasket. And one trip on the way up to Port Jervis, one of them on the fireman's side shattered, which is not a good thing because essentially that engine ran at 255 pounds of pressure per square inch. So basically you have loose shrapnel inside the cylinder being forced around and banged around at 250 pounds of pressure per inch. So we kind of got tugged into a place called Campbell Hall, and with tow trucks and tools that were minimal, I mean, we had to essentially take apart the cylinder, pull out the piston, replace the cylinder ring, and put it all back together, and that took all night. We got back the next morning at like 6 o'clock, and 7:30 crowd came back in for like cab visits. So we had about an hour and a half to grab a bite to eat, go to the bathroom, do what you had to do, and start the show again. But it was all in fun. And one memory that always sticks with me, even to this day, there was one station stop in between Hoboken and Port Jervis up near Wyckoff, New Jersey. And on the way back, when we had stopped to drop off passengers, just by location of where the engine physically stopped, it was near what looked to be an apartment building. And I'll never forget it. We were stopped and we were just waiting for everything to finish, passengers to, de-embark. And once we got the clear, we would go back to Hoboken. And I just kind of looked around, and I looked, and there was this little old lady that was sitting on the balcony of the building. And I can imagine the memories it brought back to her, maybe, getting to see really big live steam actually working back in the day. And I really laid on the whistle. And when she saw it, she looked down at the train, and I pointed up to her and waved and tooted the whistle. And you could see the glee on her face, and I mean that's what it's all about. I mean, when we just seeing the joy on people's face as we went through the different towns, even though we didn't stop, just seeing the people lined up on the tracks, waiting for a run by, waiting on bridges, waiting for the train to go through. I mean, I don't know. There had to be a couple hundred people, in various towns waiting for the train to go through. And just to see all the faces of, the older people, anywhere from grandpas to grandsons and granddaughters. I mean, from little kids to older people. I mean, everybody was there to see the train, and just getting the sense of pride and joy and self accomplishment. I mean, just seeing all of those people, just seeing that look. If you go to a railroad that has even a smaller, like a tourist railroad, just seeing the look on all the kids' faces, that kind of tells it all. That's what it's all about, the excitement.
In part 2, we will talk with Bob about his experience with MTH and more about his collection. Make sure to stick around for part 2. It'll be out very soon, and see you guys in the next podcast.